Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about this today, and I haven't done a video on the idea of the NHL maybe shaking things up a bit in quite some time. Seattle's brought into the league as team number 32, and that's it. And that's what the NHL said about a month ago. Gary Bettman was asked about expansion, and his answer was, "We're not in expansion mode." Which is not to say he was saying in that moment, "We will never look at expansion. We will never look at moving. We will never look at any of that." And so it's one of those things that you can view either way. Either, well, the NHL isn't going to expand against this is crazy, or they're not expanding right now. And as the finances in the NHL continue to seemingly get better, there's still going to be that temptation. That's still going to be there. Now, my Atlanta Thrashers magnet's on the board because, bless them. They're talking about Atlanta. I did the video on that. I don't want to get into the Atlanta side of it so much in this one because we've discussed that. But I want to talk about first teams that have moved or teams that have folded in the NHL. Because there have been times where teams have folded in the National Hockey League. Starting with the Montreal Wanderers in 1918, the first year that the National Hockey League's around, and in their first season, their building burnt down. And if you wanted to bring back the Wanderers back then, the other problem you had was finding enough players because World War One. So with that being in place, the Montreal Wanderers just disappeared. Then you have the Quebec Bulldogs. Now, the asterisk next to these cities, these franchises, is because the NHL would have a team there at a later time. So Quebec here, the Bulldogs in 1920 sold to a Hamilton-based company that said, we'll move them to Hamilton. So in Hamilton, they stayed there until 1925. They ceased operations due to a players' strike, and then the players were sold to the New York Americans, who would later become the Brooklyn Americans. So Hamilton has never been in the NHL again. I'll talk about them over here, but they're one of the few that doesn't have an asterisk here. Then you got the Pittsburgh Pirates. I almost said Penguins, but Pirates in this case. They, in 1930, moved to Philadelphia. The Great Depression was really taking over at this time, and it took its toll on the National Hockey League and its franchises, as it would have taken a toll on every professional league. So you come through World War I, where you're having trouble getting players to play because they're overseas, and now you've got a problem with finances because nobody has any money due to the Great Depression. The Philadelphia Quakers, which was what the Pittsburgh Pirates were named when they were moved, they only last a year. So they ended up, because of the Great Depression and all the same financial struggles, they were defunct. But again, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia currently have teams in the National Hockey League. Then you have the Ottawa Senators. 1934 is when they were moved to St. Louis because Great Depression. So Ottawa would come back into the league as the Ottawa Senators in the early 90s. Completely different franchise. And it was a long time in between games in Ottawa for the National Hockey League, but they would return. Now, the St. Louis Eagles only lasted a year, much like the Philadelphia Quakers. 1935, again, Great Depression, financial issues. St. Louis loses their team, but the NHL would return to St. Louis about 30 years later. So again, you got Quebec, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Ottawa, St. Louis. Now, people will point out with Quebec, and I will agree on this, Quebec, it was a WHA team. Technically, the NHL never expanded to Quebec City. So this is the other thing. For Quebec City, and for fans who want to see the team come back, the NHL never actually expanded to Quebec City. They just admitted the team from the WHA, which to me is a little different. Then 1938 sees the demise of the Montreal Maroons because depression. So you had the Montreal Canadiens, you had the Montreal Maroons, and it was, it would have been fun back then to be a fan of one or the other against the other, and at any rate, that went away. 1942, the Brooklyn Americans were done. I've talked about the Brooklyn Americans. I talked about that in the history videos where I went through the NHL year by year, and how there were certain shenanigans that went on with the New York Americans, but they had financial issues, and they had a lack of players due to World War II. So again, the war steps in. Now, I changed colors from black to blue because we're getting into the modern era. We're getting into teams that a lot of people watching this would remember. Others may not have seen at all, but they'd know the names. Starting with the Kansas City Scouts, who moved in 1976. They were sold to investors who moved the team to Colorado, where they would become the Rockies. Now, Kansas City has not had a team again, but they're on the list on this side for good reason. Then you have the California Golden Seals, who also moved in 1976. They moved to Cleveland, the home of George Gund, who was the owner, and it didn't work out in Cleveland. That team folded in 1978, and again, financial issues. So this is the last defunct team in the National Hockey League. From there, everybody else gets moved. So the Cleveland Barons are a last refuge of defunctness. The thing is, in their defunctness, they also took their players, combined them with Minnesota North Stars, which took a bad team and made them mediocre. It was weird. You'd think that combining two teams would make that team really, really. Imagine if that happened now. Let's just say Vancouver. They say, all right, we're closing up shop. Vancouver's never going to win anything. We're going to fold this team and send all their players to Seattle. People would just lose their minds. But are you kidding me? There's two teams worth of players in one city? Yeah, it didn't make a difference. Cleveland, it didn't move the needle for Minnesota. Not right away, anyways. The Atlanta Flames get moved in 1980. Financial issues. They're sold to move to Calgary. Calgary kept the team name. I saw the comments, but why did they keep the team name? You know, the Fire was in Atlanta because it's a cool name. Calgary Flames just sounds awesome. It just sounds great, and it's a unique name in sports. I will say that with Flames, it's unique. It is not generic. It's not the Calgary Wildcats or Calgary Stallions and I'm sure if they'd not had the name Flames, it probably would have been something like Stallions or something along those lines. And at any rate, yeah, it's worked out pretty well in Calgary. Then you have the Colorado Rockies, who in 1982, they're sold to be moved to New Jersey. So just think about this for a second, too. You have, in 1976, Kansas City is done. They're moved to Colorado. And 6 years later, they're moved to New Jersey. So the amount of negativity around that franchise, it was a lot. And then to make it worse, when they get to New Jersey, it's a disaster out of the gate. It's a poorly run franchise. It is amazing. It is, to me, miraculous that the New Jersey Devils got through that era, and now we don't hear anything about movement or anything about problems. But yeah, in the 80s, there was a lot of talk about maybe it's not going to work in New Jersey either. So the Rockies got moved, and then it's not until 1993 that we get the next. That's the Minnesota North Stars. Again, moved for financial reasons. Also, bad ownership definitely plays a role there. They end up in Dallas. We know how well they've done in Dallas. Quebec Nordiques moved in 1995. Again, financial reasons. The Canadian dollar plummeting, and just the overall financial picture not rosy for the future for the Quebec Nordiques. It was one of those where I don't think they were losing a ton of money yet, but they were going to, and they knew they were going to lose a ton of money. So the team gets moved to Denver. We have not seen a team go back to Colorado, but we've seen a team back in Atlanta. We've seen a team back in Colorado, and we've seen a team go back to Minnesota because Minnesota never should have lost their team in the first place. The Winnipeg Jets got moved in 1996. Again, financial reasons moved them to Arizona. I feel like I should pause for the laughter at that point because in Arizona, it hasn't been a windfall. But Winnipeg, of course, there's an asterisk because now we have the Winnipeg Jets back. The Hartford Whalers got moved a year later, and again, it's financial reasons. Or, as Gary Bettman put it at the time, the NHL has a problem. It can be spelled with three letters, WHA. So that was the Nordiques, the Jets, and the Whalers, and it made Oiler fans really nervous because they were the last one left standing. And in the late 90s, there were definitely discussions of whether either or maybe both of the teams in Alberta could end up being gone. But the NHL ended up making sure that didn't happen. So Hartford moves to Carolina. Again, financial reasons. And then 2011, the most recently moved team is the Atlanta Thrashers. No arena. So bad ownership, no arena, and they were off to Winnipeg where Mark Chipman, guy with a few bucks, and that definitely helps having deep pockets. And so the Winnipeg Jets financially are pretty stable. And this was the last move. And it's always felt like with Gary Bettman that this is where the line's drawn. Like this was going to be the last time that a team moved. That was the first time in almost 15 years that a team had moved. He didn't want to do it again. He didn't want to end up... And I think the Thrashers, it kind of left a little bit of egg on his face too when that team didn't work out. And I've talked about Atlanta a few times in a few different videos. I think it's too bad. I do. I think it's too bad because I think in certain circumstances Atlanta could have worked. Because the NHL's been there twice, I don't know that a third time happens. I really don't. There's no other situation here where a team has failed twice in the same city and then got a third team. You get a second team, sure. Again, Quebec, Pittsburgh, and again, Quebec, that was WHA. Pittsburgh, Philly, Ottawa, St. Louis, Brooklyn. I put an asterisk there because New York Islanders. and also Buffalo. So, I mean, there's other teams in New York. It's not Brooklyn, but still. They tried Brooklyn with the Islanders. That didn't work out so well. California Golden Seals gets the asterisk because San Jose. San Jose doing the Seals throwback because there's some synergy between what the Golden Seals were and then what the Sharks are. Atlanta, Colorado, Minnesota, Winnipeg. So, what if they did look to expansion, right? Now, I agree it's not in the cards, and I don't think it's coming anytime soon. But I figured I might as well do a video on this. We can discuss it. You guys can let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on it, because when I looked on the channel, the last time I did a video specifically on this topic was 2019. So that's about 4 years ago that I actually did a video on that. So why not? So Atlanta, I put at the top because I don't think that necessarily happens, but it is a big market. Atlanta and Houston are huge markets in the NHL. What helps with Houston too, they're not on this board. Now the Houston Aeros didn't end up being part of the NHL expansion, and they just didn't make the cut. But the Houston Aeros did well at times in the WHA, and I think it's such a big market, and you've got a nice building there, that it might be too much for the NHL to pass up. And NHL owners Jeremy Jacobs famously talking about how, Houston's a great spot to go and it'd be great to have a team in Houston. So Jeremy Jacobs, who is hard line, old school owner, if he's saying that, then there's other owners that likely agree with him. So I think Houston, if/when the NHL does decide, we need more than 32, we may very well see a team in Houston. Quebec City's on the board because it has to be. And this is the sad part. I don't know that the NHL has any intention of going to Quebec City. Now, when the Las Vegas round of expansion took place, the NHL gave Quebec a chance. Quebecor was in the bidding, and then Quebecor dropped out. There were financial reasons Quebecor dropped out, and it felt to me at the time like that's it. There will be no Quebec Nordiques. If it was going to happen, it had to happen in that expansion along with Las Vegas. You'd have a team in the West, you'd have a team in the East, you'd figure out your conferences after that. But I felt like the Quebecor deal not happening, regardless of why you feel that fell through, I feel like that was the last gasp of what might have been for the Quebec Nordiques. Then you've got Hamilton. Now, Hamilton, you'd have some pushback from Toronto, from Buffalo. It absolutely would work in Hamilton. I am 100% behind the idea of having a team in Hamilton, Ontario. I think it would be great. And there are other spots in Ontario you could put a team and it would work. There's no reason it won't, but I don't know that the NHL has any desire. There's the big market aspect, and then there's trying to win over new fans. And there's the perception that you don't need to put a team in a city like Hamilton, Kingston, wherever in Ontario you want to throw it, or a second team in Toronto, because you're not winning over new fans. Yeah, you're going to make millions of dollars, but what's the fun in that? You want to try to win over people that don't watch hockey. So it's an odd system. I don't know that there's another league that does this in North America. The NBA tried Vancouver once, and it's never come back since. And it doesn't feel like in the NBA they're trying to necessarily make new fans. They just go where the money is. NFL, Major League Baseball. The NFL, we could talk about the teams in LA and the headache that I had as a San Diego fan of the Chargers, but we'll stick with the NHL for now. And I don't know that Hamilton would even be on the radar if the NHL said we're going to expand. I really don't. And then you need a deep-pocketed owner that wants a team there. In Houston, there's the belief that there is, and the rumor with Atlanta is that there is as well. And whether you build that building in Atlanta or you build it outside of Atlanta, wherever you put that, if you've got somebody with a lot of money, the NHL's going to listen. They're at least going to listen. Whether we like it or we don't, they're going to listen. Then you've got Milwaukee. Milwaukee gets mentioned a lot when we do live streams. I've had so many questions do you think the NHL could work in Milwaukee? The answer I have is yes. I think the NHL could work in Milwaukee. I don't think it's a market that the NHL's had a ton of interest in. There were talks of a Milwaukee NHL team, I want to say the early 90s, but there's been nothing. Throughout all of the expansions that have gone on, it hasn't been a thing. Then you've got Portland. Now, Portland's on the board because Portland's a big city. It's down the coast from Seattle. I think that could work. I absolutely do. Portland has hockey history as well. There's been Portland hockey for over a century. You have hockey fans there. You're also going to win over some new ones, National Hockey League, if you go there. I don't know how much that's on their radar either. I would think that, let's just say they go to 34 teams. Atlanta and Houston would make sense from the point of view that Houston goes in the West, Atlanta goes in the East. So you can't have Houston and Portland because then they're both in the West. And you got to mess around and try to figure out who goes to the East. Now, if you look at a map, Nashville makes sense until you get into the time. They're in a different time zone than everybody in the East. So either you put their start times at a weird time, so the players are still playing at the same time, or you figure something else out. So I don't know that Portland happens. Hartford gets mentioned a lot. Hartford's small market. I don't see the NHL looking at going back to Connecticut either. I don't think that happens, as much as I would love to see the Whalers back in the NHL, almost as much as I'd love to see the Nordiques back. Kansas City, they have the building. At times there's been the discussion of whether or not there's going to be an NHL team there. Again, when the NHL's been going through the expansion process, Kansas City has not been prominent. Kansas City's had an NHL team before. I think that definitely puts them on the radar as a potential location. I don't know that it would be one that they would see as a top 2 or top 3 option. And I wanted to mention Saskatoon because in the early 80s, the St. Louis Blues almost became Saskatoon before the NHL said, wait, what, you're doing what? You're moving what, where? No, you're not. And so the NHL, they didn't move to Saskatoon. They blocked that. And the Blues actually opted out of a draft over all the fallout of everything that was going on there. The National Hockey League deciding that, yeah, Saskatoon's not going to happen. So I can't see in this current day and age there being any desire there too. Now, I also want to mention something that was mentioned years back, many years back, by, I think it was Bob McKenzie that brought this up, that the NHL would love to have a European division. Would be 8 teams, so you'd have 32 in North America and 8 in Europe. It doesn't work. I don't see any way that that would possibly work. You have your time difference, you have your travel. It just, I don't know how you would make that work at all. Ideally it would be great, but we don't have a teleporter to get people from, Germany or the UK over to New York or to LA for a game. So just from a cost perspective, I don't see how that could possibly work. Plus, you have a bunch of European leagues that have rights to big buildings there, and it would make it very, very difficult for the NHL to get in. I think it's more of a how much money could we make in Europe situation more than anything else. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. And again, I am not pro expansion for the National Hockey League. I can't see it happening. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. It's a fun thing to talk about. It's a fun thing to go over. And it's always fun if I get to wear Nordiques jerseys. So thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.